Ha! Hello, my loves. Today, Bigfoot, Yeti, and Zorp are traveling to Africa.
Do you think Bigfoot is going to walk all the way? No, Ned. Yeti is picking us up ahead. Walking is too much work.
See, my friends, you didn't think we'd walk, right? Look over there. There, you see it? That iron bird moves so fast. We'll be at our destination in no time.
Hello, Bigfoot. It's been such a long time since we've gone out together, hasn't it?
Oh, really? Haven't you been busy hanging out with girls and leaving me behind? Wow, Africa at last. It's so flat and beautiful, but a little too hot and full of predators out there.
Oh, yes. The air is so fresh. I'm gonna survive here for 100 days.
Oh, no. I take back what I said earlier. This sun is unbearable.
Haha, don't worry, Bigfoot. We can handle this together.
Hey, Yeti, let's go find some water. I'm so thirsty.
All right, then. We came here to enjoy ourselves, so I'll go along with whatever you want.
I think there's a river over there.
Let's go, Yeti!
How did this deer get stuck like this? We need to think of a way to save it. Look at it, so pitiful. We'll save it and set it free, but not right now. It must really want to return to its herd. I'll help it. All right, that's enough. I'm starving.
Is it ready yet, Yeti? I'm so hungry.
Almost done. Come help me with this. It's too hot.
Haha, food that doesn't cost us much energy. That's the best, right, Yeti?
Exactly. And the venison here, it's delicious and so chewy, isn't it?
It's getting dark out here, but we are making good progress on the shelter.
Welcome, friends. Tonight, we have a tale for you.
Many years ago, in a land far away.
I never believed in Bigfoot until the day I came face to face with one. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago, and even now, I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering just thinking about it. My name isn't important. What matters is that I'm a park ranger, 15 years deep in the wild, with hands-on experience with bears, mountain lions, wolves, you name it. Dangerous animals have never rattled me until that day. It all started with a phone call on a crisp Tuesday morning in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn gold and red, the kind of quiet season I usually looked forward to before winter set in. My supervisor called at 7 sharp, a rarity, since he normally didn't get into the office until 9. His voice was different that morning, strained in a way that immediately set off alarms in my gut. He told me they needed me for a special assignment, classified, high-risk work, paying triple my usual rate. Triple. That should have screamed red flag, but my truck had died the week before, and the repair bills were bleeding my savings dry. My daughter was heading off to college next year. Every extra dollar counted. No details over the phone, just a strict order to meet at the ranger station at 6 the next morning. When I pressed him for more, he paused, then said it involved a dangerous animal situation, and that only someone experienced could handle it. Discretion, he stressed, was non-negotiable. I wasn't to mention it to anyone, not my wife, not a soul. That night, sleep barely came. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. I chalked it up to nerves, telling myself it was probably a problem bear or a rogue mountain lion, maybe an overprotective landowner who didn't want attention drawn. I arrived at the station just before 6. A black pickup sat waiting. In the truck bed were 3 men, their breaths visible in the cold morning air. 2 were familiar faces, rangers from neighboring districts, both solid, dependable, and no strangers to trouble. The third man was unknown to me, but he carried the weathered look of someone who lived outdoors. We climbed in quietly, the tension thick, the kind that tells you this isn't going to be routine. The truck rumbled away, following roads I knew well, but then, after 20 minutes, we veered onto a Forest Service road I'd never seen. Narrow, rocky, barely a path, and the truck bounced us around as the driver navigated fallen branches and jagged stones. About 40 minutes in, I noticed the man in the front passenger seat. He was out of place. Tailored suit, polished shoes, perfectly knotted tie. His hair looked as if he'd come from a boardroom, not the backcountry. But it wasn't his clothes that caught my attention, it was his face. Pure, raw terror. Sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His hands shook as they gripped the seat back. His eyes were wide, haunted, as if he hadn't slept in days. He cleared his throat, voice trembling, and told us that this job would pay more than any of us had ever made, but in return, we were to keep absolutely silent about everything we saw. Everything. The situation was classified, and the consequences of speaking out were serious. He didn't specify, but the fear in his tone left no doubt. He wasn't bluffing. There was no menace in his words, just pure, desperate fear. The kind that sinks into your chest, makes your skin crawl, and whispers, "This isn't normal." Silence fell over the truck bed, heavy, uncomfortable. I studied him, the suit guy, as the miles slid beneath us, wondering what in God's name were we about to face out there in the woods. He kept glancing at his watch, then back over his shoulder at the dense forest trailing behind us, as if expecting something massive to burst through the trees and chase the truck down. His hands shook nonstop, wiping sweat from his brow, even though the morning air was sharp and cold enough that the rest of us were bundled in jackets. After what felt like an eternity on rough, twisting forest roads, we finally arrived at what could barely be called a clearing. It was nothing more than a patch where someone had knocked down enough trees to squeeze a vehicle in. Around us, the forest pressed in on all sides, dark, thick, and oddly menacing, even in the pale light of morning. The man in the suit stepped out, briefcase in hand, looking completely out of place among the pine and spruce. He set the case on the tailgate and pulled out a topographical map that looked like it belonged in a military operations room. The terrain was unfamiliar. Even to me, I'd thought I knew this forest like the back of my hand. He traced a route to a spot deep in the wilderness where we were to set up camp, easily 8 or 10 miles from where we stood. Then he pointed to another location, about 2 miles from the campsite, where we were to lay traps. His finger trembled as it hovered over the map. The target, he said, was large and aggressive. Hikers had been attacked over the past month, though he offered no specifics. Our mission: contain it, preferably alive, but lethal force was authorized if necessary. He stressed, repeatedly, that no matter our experience, this was no ordinary animal. When we began unloading equipment from the truck, my stomach turned. These weren't ordinary traps. Bear traps, yes, but colossal, unlike anything I had ever seen in 15 years managing wildlife. Each one spanned roughly 3 feet, with steel jaws capable of snapping a telephone pole in half. The teeth were grotesquely sharp, 6 inches long, and the weight at least 100 pounds, maybe more, made my shoulders ache just to lift one. The chains were equally monstrous, thick steel links more at home on a ship's anchor than in a forest. "What exactly are we hunting?" one of the other rangers asked, his voice tight, eyes fixed on the monstrous traps. The unease in his expression mirrored my own. These were designed for something enormous, something beyond any bear I'd ever encountered. The suit guy hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Unidentified," he said at last. "Extremely large, dangerous, has been terrorizing hikers for weeks. That's all you need to know." He avoided our eyes, staring at the map instead. He didn't say bear, but we all assumed it. Perhaps a mutant grizzly or some freakishly large specimen. But these traps, they suggested something beyond even the largest bear on record. We shouldered our packs, roughly 60 pounds each, and one of the massive traps apiece. The hike to the campsite would have been brutal under normal circumstances, but something about this forest made it feel 10 times worse. From the moment we stepped off the rough road, the atmosphere felt off, wrong. Silence hung thick in the air. 15 years of wilderness experience had never prepared me for this kind of quiet. No birds sang, no small animals rustled through the underbrush, no insects hummed. Even our footsteps seemed swallowed by the forest itself. The trees pressed close, forming a dense canopy that filtered out most sunlight, bathing the forest floor in an eerie, dim twilight. The air was heavy, almost viscous, making each breath laborious. Half a mile into the hike, the first signs appeared that something in these woods was deeply, violently wrong. Scattered camping gear, a torn backpack suspended 8 feet up in a tree, fragments of a shredded sleeping bag strewn across the ground. The destruction seemed deliberate, not the random rummaging of a bear. Then came the blood, dark, dried streaks clinging to tree trunks some 8 or 9 feet off the ground. The bark had soaked in the crimson, evidence that this had been happening for weeks. My blood ran cold. Whatever we were hunting wasn't just big. It was something unlike anything I had ever faced. Whatever had left those stains was either impossibly tall or had thrown something bloody with unimaginable force. One of the rangers knelt, examining a torn scrap of fabric caught on a low branch. Thick material, like heavy-duty outdoor gear, shredded in a way no claws could create. The tears were clean, straight ripped apart by sheer brute strength. We kept moving, but the mood had shifted entirely. Easy chatter from earlier vanished. Now, every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a potential threat. Rifles gripped tighter than necessary, eyes scanning the tree line constantly. The forest itself felt hostile. With every step, the evidence of violence grew more disturbing. Torn clothing, dark blood stains, scattered camping gear, all seemingly strewn with purpose. At one point, a destroyed tent caught our attention, fabric shredded, aluminum poles bent and twisted, stakes torn from the ground with such force that clumps of earth still clung to them. And then there was the smell. At first subtle, but growing stronger with every step, musky, animal-like, yet layered with something else, something rotten, like wet fur and decaying meat. By the time we had trudged 2 hours deeper, the stench forced us to breathe through our mouths, fighting nausea with each step. Then we found them, footprints. In a small clearing where the trees parted just enough to let sunlight in, impressions pressed deep into the soft earth near a trickling stream. At first, excitement sparked we might finally identify the creature, prepare ourselves accordingly. But when we drew close, all the color drained from our faces. The prints were enormous, easily 18 inches long, 8 inches wide at their broadest. Not paw prints, not claws human in shape, but impossibly scaled, toes clearly defined, arches present, heels pressed into the soft soil. No human, no matter how big, could leave marks this deep. Dozens of prints fanned out around the clearing, some partially covered by leaves or debris, suggesting they were made over days or weeks. Stride lengths of at least 4 feet hinted at a creature either astonishingly tall or capable of taking immense steps. One of the rangers knelt, pressing his size 11 boot next to a print. The boot looked laughably small. The depth suggested weight far beyond any bear I'd ever tracked. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "No bear leaves tracks like this. No animal I know leaves tracks like this. Almost human, but no person could be this big, or this heavy." We spent nearly half an hour scrutinizing the prints, trying to rationalize them, to find some natural explanation. There wasn't one. These were the footprints of something that shouldn't exist, something completely outside any known category of animal. That's when 2 of the 15 men made their choice. Packs thudded to the ground. Personal gear came out. "I'm out," one said, his voice steady but firm. "Whatever this is, I didn't sign up for it. My wife's pregnant with our first kid. I'm not dying out here for any paycheck." The other ranger nodded, shoulders squared as he lifted his lighter pack. "You should all come back with us," he said. "This feels wrong. These aren't animal tracks. Whatever made them isn't going to be stopped by the gear we've been given." They started back down the trail. I won't lie, part of me wanted to follow. Every instinct screamed the same warning. We were stepping into something beyond our control. But the money, the mission, the pride, I stayed. After the 2 disappeared into the forest, the silence deepened, pressing down like a physical weight. The remaining 13 of us lingered, circling the impossible footprints, no one daring to suggest pressing further. Finally, the oldest and most experienced ranger exhaled, adjusting the straps of his pack. "We've come this far," he said, voice low and deliberate. "Let's at least set up camp and see what we're dealing with, but stay sharp. At the first sign, this is more than we can handle. We're out." No hesitation. The rest of the hike to the campsite took another 2 hours, and it felt like walking through a graveyard. Silence pressed down on us, heavy and unyielding, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the leaf-strewn forest floor and the occasional snap or crack from deep within the trees. Sometimes it sounded like branches breaking, but too loud, too precise to be deadwood falling naturally. Evidence of something powerful continued to appear. Branches broken at impossible heights. Deep, deliberate scratches gouged into the bark, far above what any normal animal could reach. At one point, we came across a boulder the size of a refrigerator, dragged or rolled from its original spot, leaving deep furrows in the earth as though some immense force had moved it with ease. When we finally reached the clearing designated for our campsite, I felt my stomach tighten. Thick forest encircled the area on all sides, providing endless hiding spots. From any point, we were exposed, completely visible and completely vulnerable. The clearing itself was roughly 50 yards across, with a small stream cutting along one edge. Normally, this would have been perfect. open space, fresh water, and room to maneuver. But tonight, knowing that something massive and unknown lurked in those trees, it felt like a trap. We set up our tents in a tight circle at the center of the clearing, working quickly to build a fire pit with stones from the stream. The sun was dipping below the horizon, and temperatures were dropping fast. Darkness would come quickly, and none of us wanted to be caught setting up camp in it. As we worked, I kept catching movement out of the corner of my eye shadows flicking between trees, but every time I turned, nothing was there. The feeling of being watched was palpable, crawling up my spine like icy fingers. I wasn't the only one. Every ranger's gaze darted toward the tree line, hands never straying far from their weapons. One of the guys suggested an early warning system, empty cans threaded onto fishing line and strung around the perimeter of the camp. It was a simple idea, but effective. We spent the last hour of daylight weaving nearly 300 feet of invisible tripwires, dozens of cans suspended to rattle loudly if anything approached. We also unloaded the massive traps we had carried in, though we didn't set them yet. Just looking at them made my stomach churn. These were not ordinary bear traps, they were steel jaws, spring-loaded with enough force to shatter bones. Teeth long and sharp enough to slice through bone, chains anchored to stakes we would have to hammer deep into the ground. Everything about them screamed that we were hunting something enormous, something unbelievably strong. That night, we huddled around the fire, trying to keep conversation light. Stories of past wildlife encounters floated between us, bears getting too comfortable around campsites, mountain lions stalking hikers, aggressive elk during rutting season. Normally, these tales were enough to rattle outsiders. Tonight, they felt tame, almost absurd, compared to the evidence we'd seen in the forest. Every crack, every whisper of wind through the trees reminded us that this was no ordinary mission. Whatever was out there, waiting in the shadows, it was bigger, stronger, and far more dangerous than anything we had ever faced. None of us had ever encountered an animal capable of leaving 18-inch, human-like footprints or tearing camping gear apart as if it were tissue paper. As night deepened, the forest pressed down around us, unnaturally silent. No owls called, no nocturnal animals rustled, not a single insect dared to make a sound. It was as if the entire forest had vanished, leaving us alone with whatever had wrought the destruction. I was on the second watch, which should have allowed a few hours of sleep, but rest was impossible. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind, made my hand twitch toward my rifle. The fire danced, shadows twisting in impossible ways, as though alive. Every gust through the trees sounded like heavy footsteps closing in. By midnight, I gave up entirely, lying awake in my tent, straining to catch every sound. That's when it came, a low, rumbling growl, or maybe a call, deep and resonant, emanating from the heart of the forest. 10 seconds of pure, primal presence, and then silence. Every hair on my body stood on end. I told myself I imagined it, but 20 minutes later, it came again, this time from another direction. Sleep finally claimed me around 3, but only in nightmares. Massive shapes moving through the trees, glowing eyes watching us from the darkness beyond the fire. Then, at 4:30 a.m., chaos erupted. The alarm system screamed to life not 1 or 2 cans, but dozens, clanging and rattling like a metal storm. We bolted upright, rifles in hand, stumbling out of our tents in various states of readiness. The sound came from all around, as if we were encircled. For nearly a minute, the forest was filled with metallic cacophony and snapping lines before silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Flashlights pierced the darkness as we rushed to the perimeter. The cans swung violently, some ripped from their lines entirely, scattered across the ground. Yet the beams revealed nothing, just shadowed forest and unyielding darkness. The fishing line wasn't simply broken, it had been shredded, torn by strength beyond anything we had ever seen. Some cans had been hurled 20 feet, embedding in tree trunks. One of the rangers whispered of footsteps heavy, deliberate, human-like, yet carrying weight that made the earth itself seem to shiver. The steps circled the camp multiple times, always staying just beyond the reach of our lights. We huddled around the fire in a tight defensive circle, backs to the flames, eyes straining into the blackness. Sleep wasn't even an option. Whatever stalked us knew our exact location and had come close enough to test our alarms without ever being seen. The waiting was unbearable. At first light, we paired up to deploy the traps marked on our map. Leaving the fire's relative safety felt like stepping into a predator's lair. Packs loaded with massive traps, extra ammunition, and emergency flares, we moved cautiously toward the first location. The trail was unlike any game path I'd known, nearly 8 feet wide with trees broken or pushed aside and soil compacted by decades of heavy footsteps. Then we saw them, the enormous footprints, pressed deep into the earth, evidence of a creature of unimaginable size that had used this corridor for years. Setting the trap took nearly an hour. We dug a pit large enough to partially conceal the steel jaws, then camouflaged it with branches and leaves. Every motion felt heavy, deliberate, slow. Every scrape of metal against soil, every shift in the dirt, made me hyper-aware of the forest surrounding us. Something massive had walked these trails before, and it could return at any moment. The trap was monstrous. It took 3 of us working in unison just to position it properly. Driving the anchor stakes required swings with a 10-pound sledgehammer, each turn demanding brute strength and precision. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. I'd stop, scan the surrounding forest, but saw nothing. Every rustle, every whisper of wind made me jump. The others were on edge too, constantly glancing over their shoulders, every small sound sending a jolt through them. The second trap location was worse. The trail passed between 2 massive boulders, creating a natural choke point that anything traveling the path would be forced to use. But someone or something had been modifying the area. Branches were woven between the rocks, forming crude concealment. And carved into the stone were symbols deliberate enough to suggest a primitive system of communication. Simple geometric shapes, circles, triangles, parallel lines mixed with complex, pictograph-like etchings resembling ancient cave paintings. Deep gouges cut into solid rock, carved with unimaginable force. And then there were the footprints, impossible footprints. Some fresh, made during the night while we slept. They led right up to the rocks, then vanished on the other side. The creature had been here recently, possibly watching us work. The thought that something so massive had been moving around our camp in the darkness, close enough to trigger alarms yet clever enough to remain unseen, sent chills down my spine. By early afternoon, we had set all 6 traps and returned to camp, hoping for a quiet meal. For the first time since entering the forest, the day felt almost normal. We heated canned food over the fire, shared stories about our families back home. Sunlight filtered through the canopy. Birds dared to sing again. The oppressive weight of the previous night seemed to lift. For 3 blissful hours, we allowed ourselves to believe the creature had moved on. Then came the scream. It erupted from deep in the forest, in the direction of the largest trap. I've heard a lot in 15 years of wildlife work, but nothing like this. Part roar, part human shriek, filled with rage and pain, the sound rolled through the trees, rising and falling like a living siren, echoing endlessly. We grabbed our rifles and medical supplies and ran toward it, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs. The scream grew louder, more desperate. Mixed with it were other sounds, the metallic rattling of chains, the crack of breaking branches, the eerie screech of steel straining under immense force. What we found at the trap site still haunts me. The trap had worked flawlessly. Something enormous was caught in the steel jaws, and it was furious. At first, through the trees and undergrowth, it looked like a giant human, cloaked in dark brown fur. As we drew closer, the details became horrifyingly clear. This was no animal I'd ever seen. The creature stood at least 8 feet tall, possibly 9. Its shoulders spanned 4 feet, broader than any human, with arms unnaturally long and powerful. Its hands were huge, fingers tipped with thick black nails capable of tearing bark from trees. And then the face. It wasn't human, yet not entirely ape. A massive brow ridge, a jaw too large and powerful for any human, eyes set too far apart. Yet within those eyes was intelligence, a cold awareness, a calculating presence you never see in ordinary animals. It was studying us, measuring us. And in that moment, I realized with a bone-deep certainty, we were dealing with something far beyond any wildlife I had ever faced. When it saw us approaching, it let out another bone-chilling scream and yanked at the trap with unimaginable strength. The steel jaws clamped onto its left leg just above the ankle, and it was trying to pry them apart with bare hands. The chain anchoring the trap to the stake groaned under the strain, metal screaming as if protesting the creature's raw power. We froze for several seconds, paralyzed by disbelief. This thing wasn't supposed to exist. It looked like a living page from a prehistoric textbook, a missing link between humans and apes, something that should have vanished hundreds of thousands of years ago. It noticed our hesitation. Its intelligent, calculating eyes locked onto us, studying each face. The look it gave was pure hatred, but also a strange awareness, as if it understood exactly who we were and what we'd done to it. Finally, one of the rangers raised a tranquilizer gun, loaded with enough sedative to knock out a full-grown grizzly. His hands shook as he aimed at the creature's shoulder. The dart struck with a soft thunk. We stepped back, holding our breath, but the creature merely glanced at the dart, pulled it free with 2 fingers, and flung it back at us. It thrashed against the trap with renewed fury, anger radiating from every movement. Another dart, aimed for the chest this time, then a third, then a fourth. Even doses that should have subdued a 1,000-pound bear barely slowed it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, its movements grew sluggish, unsteady. It didn't lose consciousness, just lacked the strength to continue fighting. Glaring at us with those terrible, intelligent eyes, it swayed on its feet. It took all 13 of us to load the semi-conscious creature onto the heavy-duty transport cart. Even drugged, it weighed at least 600 pounds, possibly more. Chains designed specifically for the task were wrapped around its limbs, locks clicking into place with precision, as if the equipment had been made for something exactly like this. The first close-up was horrifying. The leg caught in the trap wasn't broken a marvel, considering the steel jaws had closed with enough force to snap bone. Its fur was coarse, thick, more like a wild boar than any primate. Beneath the hair, muscles rippled as though carved from stone. This creature was built for strength and endurance, evolution's answer to surviving conditions that would kill a normal human. And then there were its hands and feet, too large, too strong, yet unmistakably human in structure. Joints in all the right places, opposable thumbs, arches matching the footprints we had tracked. Every inch screamed power, yet eerily familiar. Back at camp, we assembled a massive cage from components packed in our supply boxes. Bolts and brackets lined up perfectly, as if custom designed for something 9 feet tall with unimaginable strength. We loaded the unconscious creature inside, securing multiple heavy-duty padlocks. Even immobile, it radiated menace, the sheer presence of it dwarfing everything around. In daylight, its ancient nature became apparent. Bone structure, musculature, even the way its hair grew in patterns, everything suggested a lineage separate from modern humans for hundreds of thousands of years. To keep it manageable, tranquilizer injections were administered every few hours. Even half-conscious, its gaze was terrifying. It watched us with hatred and intelligence, memorizing every face, every movement. This wasn't a mindless animal. It understood. It planned. That night, we established a guard rotation. 2 people at the cage at all times. I volunteered for the first shift with the most experienced ranger. We positioned ourselves 10 feet away, rifles across our knees, close enough to monitor but far enough to avoid its reach. For the first few hours, all was silent. Its breathing slow, steady, but the knowledge that it was watching, waiting, thinking, made every second feel like an eternity. We kept our voices low, every movement deliberate, trying not to wake the creature in the cage. Around 2 a.m., the rebuilt perimeter alarm system erupted, but this time, we could see what was triggering it. Dark shapes slinked between the trees just beyond the firelight, at least 3 or 4, maybe more. They stayed in the shadows, only occasionally revealing massive forms moving with uncanny stealth. "There are others," my partner whispered, voice barely audible. "A whole family, they're communicating, low rumbles, almost more felt than heard. They were coordinating, positioning themselves around our camp as if planning an attack." We woke the rest of the team quietly. Rifles ready, we didn't dare step outside the circle of firelight. Whatever was out there had the advantage: numbers, darkness, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Then the rocks began to fly. The first boulder whistled through the night, crashing into our fire pit, scattering burning logs and sparks. A barrage followed stones the size of baseballs, others as large as bowling balls hurling through the air with terrifying precision. We dove for cover behind trees and equipment, but the assault continued for nearly an hour. They were clever. While some hurled rocks, others moved silently, making noise from different directions to confuse us, making it seem like we were surrounded by dozens more. Branches snapped in the distance as they maneuvered, always staying just beyond our sight. Every attempt at a counterattack drew another volley. We were pinned, helpless, forced into defensive positions over and over. The psychological assault was as punishing as the physical one, the constant noise, the feeling of being surrounded, the certainty that intelligent predators were studying our every move. Our nerves frayed, our minds slowed. Then, at 4 a.m., silence fell. The forest went quiet again, but we knew they hadn't left. They were still out there, watching, waiting. We huddled around the fire's remains, taking turns on watch, every small sound sending us into high alert. By dawn, exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. The oldest and most experienced ranger, our leader from the start, called us together. His face was drawn, older somehow, as if the stress of the night had aged him years. He surveyed each of us, seeing the terror mirrored in our eyes. "This was a mistake," he said quietly. "We don't belong here. These things, they won't stop until they get their friend back. And there are more of them than there are of us. They're smarter than we expected, better organized, and they know this forest far better than we ever will." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I'm calling this off. Pack your gear, we're leaving." No one argued. After the previous night, we had all arrived at the same conclusion independently. We were outmatched beyond training, beyond equipment, beyond survival. Staying would have been suicide. As we broke camp, my eyes kept drifting to the cage holding the creature. Part of me felt guilty leaving it there, but a larger part feared moving it. The creature was stirring as the tranquilizer wore off, watching our retreat with intelligent, calculating eyes. There was something almost satisfied in its expression, as if it knew its family would come and that we had finally made the smart choice to get out of their way. We moved in tight formation, constantly scanning the forest. For the first mile, the sounds followed us, snapping branches, low rumbles, coordinating movements, and the unmistakable thud of heavy footsteps moving parallel to our path. Yet they never revealed themselves directly. It was as if they were herding us, ensuring we left their territory without attempting to flank us. Even in retreat, the intelligence and power of these creatures was undeniable. They weren't just predators, they were strategists, guardians, a force of nature with awareness and cunning that no human had faced before. And for the first time in my life, I understood fear in its purest form. Respect for something older, stronger, and smarter than anything we could ever hope to control. Maybe they had already shifted their focus to freeing their captured family member and no longer saw us as a threat. Every step away from that camp felt like a small victory, but we didn't dare relax. The forest remained unnaturally quiet, except for the subtle, ominous sounds of whatever was trailing us through the trees. We moved as quickly as we could, maintaining tight formation, no one daring to fall behind. Halfway back to the drop-off point, new sounds erupted from behind us, metal tearing, heavy objects crashing, and those same bone-chilling screams that had first echoed through the forest when the trap had been triggered. It was clear the creatures were dismantling our former campsite, likely trying to free their captured kin. We didn't hesitate. No one suggested turning back to investigate. No one thought to recapture the creature. The lesson had been learned. These weren't ordinary animals. They were smarter, faster, and far more dangerous than anything we'd ever encountered. When we finally reached the rough road where the truck was supposed to pick us up, I felt a fleeting sense of relief, but the vehicle wasn't there. We'd been told someone would meet us, yet the road stretched empty. We waited 3 agonizing hours before a black SUV finally appeared. The man in the business suit was back in the passenger seat, but now he looked even more terrified than the first time we'd seen him. Pale-faced, hands trembling violently, barely able to hold the radio he used to relay urgent messages. The ride back was silent. None of us spoke. The suit guy was occupied with whispered, urgent radio conversations. I caught fragments: containment failure, asset recovery, secondary protocols. By the time we reached the ranger station, the nightmare wasn't over. We were separated and taken to different rooms for individual debriefings. I spent 6 hours in a windowless chamber with 2 men in identical gray suits. The questions were relentless and repetitive. Every detail, every observation. They wanted to know what the creatures looked like, how many there were, their capabilities, and most of all, the intelligence they had displayed. Tool use, coordinated attacks, communication between them, they cataloged it all. At the end, they handed me a stack of documents to sign: non-disclosure agreements, security clearances, statements acknowledging that everything I had witnessed was classified at the highest government levels. They made it clear that any discussion of the events would carry serious legal and criminal consequences. But threats weren't necessary. None of us wanted to speak anyway. Who would believe us? And more importantly, who would want to hear that creatures like that existed, living undetected in our national forests? I was given 2 weeks of paid leave and reassigned to a different district. Officially, my assignment record showed routine wildlife management during the time I had been deep in that forest. Paperwork-wise, nothing unusual had occurred. But I knew the truth. Even among the other rangers, subtle looks and hushed comments confirmed that word was leaking through unofficial channels. Rumors of similar encounters elsewhere, stories of elite government teams handling cryptid situations, whispered accounts of facilities where captured specimens were studied. It was out there. I had seen it. I had lived it. And I would never forget it. Within a month, the entire forest where we'd been deployed was quietly closed to the public. Officially, the reason was unstable soil and hazardous conditions for hikers, but anyone familiar with the area knew that was nonsense. Roadblocks went up, no trespassing signs were posted, and the region was declared off-limits. Through whispers and unofficial channels, I learned that specialists had been brought in: anthropologists, military personnel, teams with equipment we'd never seen before. The government wasn't just interested, they were studying these creatures, ensuring their existence remained secret. I never learned exactly what happened to the creature we had captured. Part of me hopes it was returned to its family after the research was done. But given the intense interest from government scientists, I doubt it was that simple. 6 months later, I requested a transfer as far away from those woods as possible. I told my supervisor it was for personal reasons. He didn't ask, but I think he understood. Some of us needed distance from what we'd encountered. Even 3 years later, I can't fully process it. Sometimes I wake in the dead of night, thinking I hear those low, rumbling calls echoing through darkness. My eyes scan tree lines for massive shapes that shouldn't exist. Other rangers have whispered similar stories from different parts of the country: sightings covered up, evidence disappearing, witnesses quietly reassigned or retiring early. There's an informal network of people like me who share experiences off the record. Officially, these creatures don't exist. Sightings get chalked up to misidentified bears, hoaxes, or stress-induced hallucinations. But those of us who've seen them know better. What haunts me most is realizing how long this has been happening. These creatures aren't new. They've lived in our forests for centuries, avoiding humans with remarkable skill. But with expanded exploration and advanced surveillance, encounters are becoming more frequent. The government's response, specialized equipment, protocols, and teams trained to handle these situations shows this has been going on for decades. It's a long-term operation, invisible to most, but the creatures themselves are incredibly intelligent. They remain hidden when they want to, avoid humans, and even when they engage, it's calculated. Maybe that balance is for the best. They stay in the deep wilderness, we stay in our cities, and everyone survives. I've thought about leaving the ranger service entirely, moving to a city, distancing myself from the wilderness, but this is the only career I've ever known. And someone has to watch, to monitor these creatures, especially as human expansion increases the risk of conflict. The encounter taught me one thing clearly: these creatures don't just defend their territory, they study us. The coordinated attack on our camp showed tactical thinking, intelligence, and awareness of human behavior. They are capable of far more than hiding in the shadows. What happens if coexistence fails? What if expansion pushes humanity and these creatures into unavoidable conflict? They're strong enough to crush steel traps, smart enough to organize attacks, and numerous enough to maintain family groups across remote areas. The government has contingency plans, but can they truly contain a species that has thrived undetected for centuries? We captured one through luck and overwhelming firepower, but it was freed within hours, and we were driven from their territory. Official reports were classified, heavily redacted, but I know they're being used to develop future protocols. Somewhere, government teams are analyzing every detail of our encounter, planning for the next one. I hope they also consider that leaving these creatures alone may be the safest option. The forest where we were remains closed to the public, monitored with cameras, motion sensors, and listening devices. An entire wilderness turned into a research facility. I often wonder, are the creatures still there, or have they moved deeper? Do they know they're being watched? And if so, how are they adapting? We live in a world where only a handful of government officials and researchers know the truth, while everyone else remains oblivious. The weight of that secret grows heavier each time I see families camping in areas where these creatures might roam. If you doubt my story, that's fine. I hope you never have to experience it firsthand. But if you're ever deep in the wilderness and get that feeling of being watched, trust it. If you hear unfamiliar sounds, find impossibly large human-like footprints, Or notice the forest has gone unnaturally quiet, get out. Don't investigate. Don't try to capture proof. Move quietly, leave immediately, and never look back. These creatures are real. They're intelligent, calculating, and still out there. For now, they avoid human contact, but as climate change, deforestation, and human expansion continue, encounters will likely increase. When that happens, we'll need people who understand what we're really dealing with. And that knowledge, that awareness, could be the difference between survival and disaster. Thank you all for watching. That's the end of the video. Goodbye, and see you next time.